looking to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. Inflation rose to 8% in November, the fastest since the 9.1% recorded in the same month last year. And to the global cost of living crisis and some reassuring news from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization that the cost of many key foodstuffs remained largely steady last month. And the proposed Maharlika Investment Fund will not suffer the same fate as the infamous 1MDB Fund of Malaysia because it will have enough accounting and transparency safeguards, economic managers and lawmakers claimed. And later, Christy Alley, the two-time Emmy-winning actor who starred in the hit television sitcom Cheers, died after a battle of cancer or with cancer. According to her family, she was 71. First in our news, inflation rose to 8% in November. This is the fastest since the 9.1% recorded in the same month last year. The Philippine Statistics Authority said this was also faster than the 7.7% in October. With this month's inflation, the country's average inflation rate from January to November this year stands at 5.6%. Let's listen in.
Ang headline inflation o ang pagtaas ng presyo ng mga produkto at serbisyo sa bansa ay bumilis sa antas na 8.0% nitong Nobyembre 2022. Ang pangunahing dahilan ng mas mataas na antas ng inflation nitong Nobyembre 2022 kaysa noong nakaraang buwan ay ang mas mabilis na pagtaas ng presyo ng food and non-alcoholic beverages. So yung ganitong inflation natin is the highest since November 2008. We had 9.1% in November 2008. But if you look at the series, the whole series, ang pinakamataas talaga natin was January 1999, 10.7% yung ating inflation at that time. So yung November 2008, I think there was a global financial crisis sa 2008. Yung effect ng petroleum products plus the effect of the food, ito yung combined effects na sa inflation natin, kaya mataas. But we are seeing naman deceleration na sa mga petroleum products. So nag-start na rin siyang mag-decelerate but it's still increasing. But the inflation is decelerating for petroleum products. So if siguro pag ma-address na natin yung effect ng yung food prices, that might decrease the inflation kasi ito talaga yung malaki ang impact sa ating inflation.
The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas released a statement saying it remains prepared to take all further monetary policy actions necessary to bring inflation back to its target in the medium term. It said while risks to the inflation outlook remains titled to the upside for 2023, price growth is seen to decelerate in the coming months. According to the BSP, monetary authorities were reassured of timely non-monetary actions by the government to cool persistent supply-side pressures. As earlier said, in what could be a sign of deceleration, inflation in the capital region slowed for the first time since July as food, utilities, and fuel cost increases moderated. Meanwhile, Go Negosyo founder Joey Concepcion said he expected inflation to go up, but he also expects it to taper off by early next year. Let's listen in.
Expected na rin yan kasi yung mga manufacturers katulad namin, matagal na that we felt all of these increases, no? But we could not pass it to the consumer. So we did it very slowly, no? That's why you see it's still rising because we are gradually passing the higher cost of raw materials to the consumers. So we don't want to destroy our Christmas, no? And have consumers really slow down their purchases. And that's why you'll see this quarter is still very good, no, for most companies. Sales is very good, very strong. We're posting growth even over last year, no? So that's a good indication. We see the malls full. We see traffic, which is good. That means people are spending. So I believe that this quarter will still be a very good quarter for most people, no? Of course, you know, I mean, we have inflation. We expected that, 7+ to 8%. That's expected, and that's why interest rates in America have risen. We have brought interest rates up. But eventually, we are seeing a tapering off. Nakikita natin yung presyo ng mga gasolina, oil, bumabagsak na rin, no? Yung presyo ng trigo, bumabagsak na rin, pero ang layo pa rin, no, sa binili namin dati, no? So it's going down slowly. Hopefully the next quarter, next year, the first quarter of next year, will definitely be much better. I see that prices should start coming down by the first quarter, and hopefully interest rates would start to taper off by the second quarter of next year.
To the global cost of living crisis and some reassuring news from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO, that the cost of many key foodstuffs remained largely steady last month. Latest data from FAO's Food Price Index found that world cereal prices fell by 1.3% in November, although they remain more than 6 times higher than 12 months ago. Wheat and maize also traded more cheaply last month, partly influenced by the extension of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Let's listen more.
The FAO Food Price Index for this month, for the month of November, remained virtually unchanged in November for the second consecutive month, as month-on-month decrease in the price indices for cereals, dairy, and meat were nearly offset by increase in vegetable oils and sugar indices. The index has fallen 15.1% from the peak it reached in March this year, whereas the index is only marginally above 0.3% its value 1 year ago in November 2021, which means at pre-war level. What are the key drivers of the food price declines in November? On the cereal price index, it declined by 1.3% month to month, but remained 6.3% above its value a year ago. The world wheat price declined in November, reflecting the impact of the extension of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, subdued import demand for supplies from the United States of America, and increased shipments from Russian Federation. By contrast, international rice prices increased. This is something that FAO has been alerting, and this is influenced by currency appreciations against the United States dollars for some Asian suppliers and good buying interest, but also because of the increase in the price of fertilizers and inputs, which has decreased the area planted for next year. And international meat price declined for the 5th consecutive month, principally due to a sharp fall in the bovine meat, offsetting the increase in other meat prices. The vegetable oil price, as I mentioned, increased after a decline for 7 consecutive months, and the increase was driven primarily by the high palm oil prices, underpinned by renewed global import demand and concerns over lower production potentials in part of South Asia due to excessive rainfalls. By contrast, international rapeseed and sunflower oil prices dropped in November, weighted by respectively expected ample global supplies and the extension of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The Black Sea Grain Initiative has contributed to improving global food supplies and lowering the global prices. As a result of the high prices, the global food import bill is projected to reach a record high level of $2 trillion. The increase in the cost of food imports is putting a lot of fiscal pressure on government budgets and causing balance of payment problems. And high food prices and the overall cost of living crisis have serious implications on food security and nutrition, particularly for the vulnerable countries and populations who spend a large share of their income on food. Thank you.
Meanwhile, Asian markets were mixed today as fresh fears that the U.S. Fed Reserve will push interest rates higher than hoped played off against growing optimism over China's economic reopening. After a strong start to the week in the region, traders tracked a big drop on Wall Street that came on the back of data showing a forecast-busting jump in activity in the U.S. services sector last month. The news, combined with Friday's bigger-than-expected print on November jobs, dented optimism that the Fed's monetary tightening campaign was finally paying off, which would give it room to take a less hawkish approach into the new year. Now, all three main indexes on Wall Street lost more than 1%, and Asia fluctuated in early trade. Hong Kong swung began between gains and losses, having soared around 15% over the past week on China's easing of strict COVID containment measures. Shanghai inched up along with Tokyo and Manila, but Sydney, Seoul, Singapore, Wellington, Taipei, and Jakarta were in the red. The dollar dipped slightly but held most of the gains made Monday after the services data release. The mood in Asia remains largely positive owing to the prospect of China rolling back some of the harsh measures that have been in place for almost 3 years and have hammered the giant economy. But analysts said the country would not likely see a complete end to the zero COVID policy for several months. The proposed Maharlika Investment Fund, or MIF, will not suffer the same fate as the infamous IMDb or 1MDB Fund of Malaysia because it will have enough accounting and transparency safeguards, according to economic managers and lawmakers. The president's own sister, Senator Amy Marcos, said it was risky to gamble retirement funds. She said, "We all know about our neighbor Malaysia, where their 1MDB was a real disaster, where the money was looted," she said, referring to the graft scandal that involved billions of dollars of state funds. But Finance Secretary Benjamin Diokno said the Philippines may miss a lot of opportunity cost if the Maharlika Investment Fund will not be enacted, since there are a lot of projects that could provide higher yield for the national government. Let's listen in.
Okay, there are some 98 social welfare funds in the world in 70 countries. Bakit natin pinagpipilitan ng isang failure, diba? These are very successful SWFs in the world. Bakit natin pinagpipilitan ng isang failure? Sinabi namin yung characteristic na isang tao lang pinipirma ng that's not gonna happen here. Diba? Meron nga tayo internal audit, may external audit ka nationally external auditor, may COA pa, meron pa oversight committee of Congress and we produce annual reports. So, walang comparison yun. Ano gusto nila natin sabihin na sino pa nag-fail na because of what's happening in Sri Lanka, maybe like Sri Lanka, or Sri Lanka. Okay? Let's have a little bit of trust in ourselves. Tsaka tayo ng Philippines sa open society. Hindi naman tayo katulad ng ibang bansa na ruled by military, dictatorial, we have a very kaya nakakapagkalong, hindi mo? Kailangan natin sila nakakapagkalong ng ganyan. I think we should have a social sovereign fund a long time ago, okay? It's starting with the Malampaya, right? We should have proceeds of Malampaya that we set aside so that future generations of Filipinos will benefit from it. So now we're thinking ahead. At this time, I think we should have a sovereign wealth fund as like other ASEAN countries, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, and we should think of putting together some funds that are investable.
Secretary Diokno is looking at the approval of the proposed Sovereign Wealth Fund by mid-2023 and cited long-term gains that will benefit the economy. Under the proposed measure, the Sovereign Wealth Fund will be financed through pooled funds from state-owned financial institutions and state pension funds. Safety of the fund's capital is set to be ensured through a three-tiered auditing to be done by an internal auditor, an external auditor, and the Commission on Audit. Former President President and House Senior Deputy Speaker Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo also stressed that sovereign wealth funds are not new, citing Singapore's Temasek Holdings that has been in existence since 1974 and the Government of Singapore Investment Corporation that is in operation since 1981. In other news, the U.S. Commerce Department accused several solar companies of evading American tariffs on imports of China-made components, findings that could add to tensions between Beijing and Washington. The department has been investigating claims that certain manufacturers of solar cells and modules went around anti-dumping and countervailing duties on China. Investigators found that 4 of the companies being looked into, including 2 Chinese, a Canadian and a Vietnam-based firm, are attempting to bypass U.S. duties by doing minor processing of Chinese-made components in several Southeast Asian countries before shipping them to the U.S. The 4 firms named were BYD Hong Kong, Trina, Canadian Solar, and Vina Solar, which were said to have sent goods through Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. As a next step, the department will conduct audits and involved parties will be able to comment on the findings. The final determination is currently scheduled for May 2023. In other news, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, or ADNOC, and Malaysia's state-owned oil and gas giant Petronas signed a historic deal for the exploration and appraisal of Abu Dhabi's first ever onshore unconventional oil block, according to the local media. Emirates news agency WAM reported that UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan and Malaysian King Sultan Abdullah Ayatuddin Al Mustafa Bil Shah witnessed the signing ceremony between ADNOC and Petronas for Abu Dhabi's unconventional onshore Block 1. According to the agency, the deal marks the first time a Malaysian company will invest in and explore for hydrocarbons in Abu Dhabi. The 6-year term agreement will allow Petronas to hold a 100% stake and operatorship to explore for and appraise unconventional oil in unconventional onshore Block 1, which covers an area of more than 2,000 square kilometers in the Al Dhafra region. More than 1 in 5 people, almost 23% in employment, have experienced violence and harassment at work, whether physical, psychological, or sexual, according to a new joint analysis, the first of its kind by the International Labour Organization, Lloyd's Register Foundation, and Gallup. Take a look.
What the survey tells us is that violence and harassment at work is widespread and it affects all regions. 1 in 5 persons have experienced violence and harassment at work during their working life. Of the 3 forms of violence and harassment at work, namely physical, sexual, and psychological, the latter is the one which is being most widespread. 18% of the respondents indeed indicated that they had been subject to that type of violence and harassment. Other issues also relate to the fact that this is not one single occurrence in life. 3 out of 5 respondents have indeed indicated that they have experienced violence and harassment at work at least 3 times in their life. So this is a sort of common problem and recurrent problem in people's working life. And perhaps the sort of most interesting finding is that 50% of those who indicated having been subject to work-related violence and harassment, only 50% of them had told someone else about this incident. It also points to the fact that in workplaces and in broader society, the existing mechanisms in order to prevent and provide remedial action are not effective, are not adequate enough. And in other instances is the actual sheer absence of such systems and laws that clearly say no to violence and harassment in the world of work, which explain why people are not forthcoming. Young women are more likely to report that they have been subject to violence and harassment at work than young men. And in the case of women do not experience violence and harassment necessarily to the same extent and in respect of the same forms. For instance, the survey highlights that migrant women are twice as likely as non-migrant women to indeed face sexual harassment and violence at work.
To Indonesia now, where houses and other buildings in Kajar Kuning village are covered in volcanic ashes, and residents stay at temporary shelters after Mount Semeru erupted in the country's East Java province. Take a look.
What the survey tells us is that violence and harassment at work is widespread and it affects all regions. 1 in 5 persons have experienced violence and harassment at work during their working life. Of the 3 forms of violence and harassment at work, namely physical, sexual, and psychological, the latter is the one which is being most widespread. 18% of the respondents indeed indicated that they had been subject to that type of violence and harassment. Other issues also relate to the fact that
To Indonesia now, where houses and other buildings in Kajar Kuning village are covered in volcanic ashes and residents stay at temporary shelters after Mount Semeru erupted in Indonesia's East Java province. Take a look.
Ya mudah-mudahan biar cepat selesai untuk bencana ini, gitu ya. Kasihan pada masyarakat dan saudara-saudara, biar tak pondong-pondong capek mas, kesel bawa pengungsi.
More than 2,400 villagers have now fled their homes and taken shelter in 11 evacuation centers after the highest mountain on the country's main island of Java erupted early morning Sunday. Officials have announced a state of emergency for the next 2 weeks, and authorities have been distributing free masks to protect against ash in the air while setting up public kitchens for evacuees. The government's alert status indicating danger from the volcano was raised to its highest alert level Sunday. It had previously been at its second highest level since a major eruption last December. Last year's eruption killed 51 people and damaged more than 5,000 homes while forcing nearly 10,000 people to seek refuge. Many of the victims from that disaster were sand miners working high on the slopes of the volcano. Indonesia sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, where the meeting of continental plates causes substantial volcanic and seismic activity. The Southeast Asian archipelago nation has nearly 130 active volcanoes. Since fleeing a military crackdown in Myanmar 5 years ago, life in the overcrowded refugee settlements in Bangladesh has prompted Rohingya families to limit the size of their households and embrace contraception. Take a look.
সংখ্যাটা বেড়ে গেছে যে আগে এরা ছিল যে যেহেতু প্রথম আসছে এরা হয়তো বুঝতো না আসলে আমরা যখন নতুন ঢুকছি এদেরকে মোটিভেশন করতে সেবা দিতে অনেক আমাদেরও হিমশিম খেতে হয়েছে তারপর হইতে আমরা ফিল্ড লেভেলে যখন আমাদের লোক গেছে সবাই বুঝাচ্ছে দেখতেছে পরে এরা বুঝতে পারছে আমরা এখানে এসে বুঝাই তার থেকে শুনে এরা অনেক অ্যাডভান্স হয়ে গেছে এরপরে আমাদের আস্তে আস্তে রুগীগুলো বেড়ে গেছে আর কি তারপরে এখানে দেখতে যে আমাদের 24/7 24 ঘন্টা খোলা থাকে সেক্ষেত্রে আমাদের সেবার পরিমাণটাও বেড়ে গেছে
পরিবার পরিকল্পনা কার্যক্রমের অভাবনীয় সাফল্য আপনি যেটা বলেছেন এটা আসলে সত্য তাদেরকে যে জায়গায় পরিবার পরিকল্পনা কর্মসূচি সম্বন্ধে বলা যেত না এখন কিন্তু তাদেরকে আমরা তাদের দোরগোড়ায় গিয়ে আমরা বলতে পারছি যে তুমি তোমরা কোনো না কোনো পদ্ধতি একটা নাও এই পদ্ধতির প্রেক্ষিতে তোমার কোনো সন্তান আর নিবে না তোমার শরীর খারাপ হয়ে যাবে এবং তোমার নবজাতক এবং শিশুর মৃত্যুর ঝুঁকি বেড়ে যাবে
তো যদি বাচ্চা বহুত দিন একবারে ডাক্তারখানায় আমি তো আঘাত দিয়ে দিত বাচ্চা 10 বছরই বা লয়রা যাইব
In other news, the UN's Children's Fund, or UNICEF, appealed for $10.3 billion in emergency funding to support children around the world affected by conflict, climate crisis, and other catastrophic events. The resources will be used throughout next year to support essential programs for over 110 million children impacted across 155 countries and territories. Take a look.
With the impact of the drought, the community access to water is becoming a big challenge. Many of the surface water sources, which normally makes a high percentage of access to water to community, have dried up. And now communities are only depending on permanent water sources, which include bowls and permanent rivers. What UNICEF is requesting is to scale up climate resilient water supply systems. For example, the use of solar energy, which is actually a renewable source of energy and also reduces the pollution of the environment through the emission of greenhouse gases. So this one we are requesting donors to support us in scaling up climate resilient wash program through drilling of deep aquifer boreholes and also solarization of boreholes to ensure that communities have access to adequate and sustainable water supply.
So here we are in Gode, just in the Somali region, just outside of Gode. The drought is having a major effect on the people here in this country. Close to 10 million people affected by the drought right now. The fourth rainy season has failed, and we're worried that the fifth is going to fail as well. And just in this region, the Somali region, close to 1 million people have actually been displaced by the drought, leaving everything behind, losing everything, and trying to find some space where they can have water and services. We need to save lives right now. We need to bring the water, the health, the food, the cash that actually people need to survive right now. But we need to find longer-term solutions. We can't do that all the time. Plus, we know that the next rainy season is likely to fail. So it's about longer-term water systems, climate resilient water systems.
Needs here in Nyiragongo are huge. We have seen massive influxes of displaced people that have fled conflict from the neighboring territory. And they have arrived with absolutely nothing of their valuables, their belonging. So we're here to give them a little bit of an emergency assistance so they can have a little bit more of a dignified life.
From conflict and displacement to disease outbreaks and soaring rates of malnutrition, UNICEF noted that there are more children in need of humanitarian assistance today than at any other time in recent history. Across the globe, she said, children are facing a deadly mix of crisis made worse by climate change. And finally, in our news, Kirstie Alley, the two-time Emmy-winning actor who starred in the hit television sitcom Cheers, died on Monday after a battle with cancer. According to her family, she was 71. Take a look. We are sad to inform you that our incredible, fierce, and loving mother has passed away after a battle with cancer only recently discovered, according to her children, Lily Price Stevenson and William True Stevenson. In a statement on Twitter, they said our mother's zest and passion for life, her children, grandchildren, and her many animals, not to mention her eternal joy of creating, were unparalleled and leave us inspired to live life to the fullest just as she did. Ali rose to prominence for her role as Rebecca Ho in the NBC sitcom Cheers, about a Boston bar, for which she received an Emmy for the Best Lead Actress in a Comedy Series in 1991. She received a second Emmy for her role in the TV film David's Mother. Ali also starred in the 1989 romantic comedy film Look Who's Talking, as well as its two sequels, alongside John Travolta. Travolta paid tribute to the actress Monday night, posting a photograph of a young Ali on Instagram. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast of ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. We'll see you back tomorrow. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.